Many of the nations that were conquered by large empires in antiquity lost their identity and disappeared without a trace. It happened to the Philistines, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Nabateans, and it almost happened to the Jews. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE was a catastrophe that almost led to the total eradication of the Jewish people. The decisive moment came toward the end of the Great Revolt against Rome, when Vespasian marched on Jerusalem at the head of a huge army. Having subdued the Galilee and repelled the Jewish fighters, the commander of the Roman army came to settle accounts with the city that had instigated the revolt. The people of Jerusalem, until this moment immersed in a bloody civil war, devote what little strength they have left to preparing for a battle they can't afford to lose. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the head of the Sanhedrin and one of the greatest sages of his generation, observes the city's bleak situation with concern. In the Civil War, neighborhoods were destroyed, ammunition wasted, and worst of all, the food storehouses that could have supported the city in a time of siege went up in flames. People were beginning to starve. Can people who cook straw and drink its water stand up to Vespasian's troops? Rabbi Yochanan warned the people that any attempt to fight the Romans would end in disaster. The rebel zealot leader didn't listen. They lock the city gates so no one can escape, and they prepare for war. Rabbi Yochanan realizes that it's too late to save Jerusalem. But if he wants to save the Jewish people, he has to slip out of the city and meet with Vespasian face to face. He pretends to be dead, and with the help of two of his disciples, tries to slip out of the city. "Stop! Stab the corpse!" The Talmud relates that the rebels at the gate were suspicious of Rabbi Yochanan's staged funeral. Only through the intervention of his confidant, a commander by the name of Ben Batya, did the rebels decide not to go through with the lethal test. His life was saved. But the big challenge still lay before him. He had to convince Vespasian to let him establish a spiritual center in place of Jerusalem. A center that would unite the people if Jerusalem were destroyed and preserve Jewish tradition. Then the Jews would have a chance of maintaining their identity and surviving as a people. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai arrives at Roman headquarters, tense and anxious. He addresses Vespasian, the commander of the army, as king, a title reserved for the emperor. He has one vital request: give me Yavneh and its sages. Vespasian is pleased with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's appeasing approach and gives his consent. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai spent the last months of the war in Yavneh. Here he received the bitter news of the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. The Jews were shocked to the core. No one could believe that the temple, which for centuries had symbolized the living connection between the people and their God, no longer stood. Many sank into grief and despair. Some even lost the will to live. The Jewish people desperately needed a new way to connect to God. One solution was to worship in synagogues spread throughout the country. Instead of the sacrifices offered by the priests in the temple, the community members would gather in their towns for communal prayer. The prayer service instituted in Yavneh is very similar to the text in the prayer books that we use today. From then on, wherever Jews lived, they could serve God through prayer, Torah study, and acts of kindness to others. But the destruction of Jerusalem created a problem that went beyond the boundaries of the land of Israel. Millions of Jews everywhere celebrated the festivals based on the appearance of the new moon as declared in the rabbinical court in Jerusalem, a court that no longer existed. Re-establishing the court in Yavneh ensured that Jewish communities around the world would celebrate the festivals on the same day. At the new center in Yavneh, the restoration continued apace. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai gave the people hope that the temple would soon be rebuilt. Meanwhile, he introduced new rules to govern daily life without the temple. Together with other sages who gathered in Yavneh, he re-established the Sanhedrin. Despite the destruction, the Jewish people retained its character and survived without the temple. And most importantly, to ensure that Jerusalem and the temple would not be forgotten, special memorial practices were instituted in Yavneh, customs for days of mourning and fasts, for festivals and joyous occasions. These unique practices implanted in the heart of every Jew the hope that Jerusalem would be rebuilt. A hope that the Jewish people have kept alive for almost 2,000 years.